After
I
6
lost
years
her
of disappearance,
6 years
he was
ago.
crying during his speech. I lost
Those
her.
are
Suddenly she
my
appeared,
daughters.
holding twin daughters. This is one of the most emotional stories I've ever written. Right now, I'm away for a medical checkup, but don't miss this one. Watch it till the end. I promise you will feel every second. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Before we begin, let me pray for you. A prayer for my beautiful family, Heavenly Father. Thank you for each beautiful heart listening today. Bless them with peace, love, health, and strength. Let these stories bring healing, hope, and joy to their lives. Amen. Binta and I are in New York for my medical checkup with Dr. Bruce Lerman, one of the best in the world. We believe everything will be fine, with your prayers beside us. While I'm away, our dear James is here for 2 to 3 days, sharing the stories. Was yesterday's story with James good? Type yes in the comments if you're happy with his effort. And please, my family, don't leave the story halfway. Stay with it, feel it, and let it speak to your heart. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and invite your family and friends too. I'll be back soon. Keep Binta and me in your prayers.
Some hearts recognize each other across crowded rooms, but Jeremy Boon's heart had been dead for so long that when it suddenly thundered back to life in the Museum of Modern Art that rainy Tuesday afternoon, he thought he might be having a heart attack. The woman standing before Monet's water lilies wasn't supposed to exist in his world. She was crying. Not delicate, practiced tears of society women, but real, soul-deep sobs that shook her entire frame. Her dark skin glowed under the museum's soft lighting, and her natural hair was pulled back in a simple bun that revealed the elegant curve of her neck. She wore a vintage coat and twice-resoled shoes, but there was something about her presence that made everyone else fade into background noise. Jeremy had been wandering the museum for an hour, escaping another board meeting where men in $1,000 suits discussed profit margins while real people suffered outside their windows. At 30, he was worth billions, but felt emptier than the day his father died and left him this empire of loneliness. This woman, this stranger whose tears fell like prayers, was feeling something real, something Jeremy had forgotten existed. He moved closer, drawn by invisible magnetism. She was whispering to the painting. If only love could really last forever like this. If only promises meant something. "Excuse me," Jeremy said softly, his commanding tone replaced by something gentler. "Are you all right?" She turned, and Jeremy's world tilted. Her eyes were honey-colored, swimming with tears, holding depths that took his breath away. For a moment, neither spoke. Jeremy felt like he was drowning and being saved simultaneously. Then her expression hardened. Vulnerability vanished, replaced by suspicion that hit like a physical blow. "I'm fine," she said, voice trembling despite attempted firmness. She wiped her eyes and started moving away. "Wait," Jeremy called, following. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. You seem to feel something so deeply about that painting. I was curious what you saw." She stopped, turned back, eyes narrowing as they assessed his expensive suit, styled hair, the watch costing more than most people's cars. "Let me guess, you're one of those men who thinks a woman crying in public is an invitation." "No, Or maybe you saw my reaction and thought, there's a woman with feelings I can manipulate." She stepped closer, and Jeremy caught her scent, something light and floral from a drugstore that was more intoxicating than any designer fragrance. "Is that it?" Jeremy felt heat rise in his cheeks. In his world, people agreed with him, flattered him, tried to get close for his money. No one had spoken this directly to him in years. "Actually, I haven't seen anyone react to art the way you were. It made me wonder what you were seeing that I've missed my entire life." She studied his face, searching for deception. "You really want to know?" "Yes." She turned back to the painting, and Jeremy stood beside her, careful to maintain respectful distance. "I see love that existed purely," she said quietly. "Monet painted these during his final years, when his eyesight was failing and his wife was dying. But look at the brush strokes, still full of hope, still full of beauty. He painted love even when his world was falling apart." Jeremy stared at the painting, then at her profile. "And that makes you sad?" "It makes me sad because love like that doesn't exist anymore," she whispered. "It's a beautiful fairy tale that artists paint and poets write, but in the real world, people like—" She gestured at his wealth. "People like you think everything can be bought, including hearts." The accusation stung because it was true. Jeremy had bought plenty: companionship, pleasure, even something resembling affection. But looking at this woman, hearing her pain, he felt ashamed of every meaningless transaction. "You're right," he said quietly. "I have thought that, but I've never been happy believing it." Surprise flickered across her features. "Most men would argue or try to prove me wrong. Most men haven't spent their lives surrounded by people who only see dollar signs when they look at them," Jeremy replied. "I'm Jeremy, by the way. Jeremy Boon." Recognition dawned, followed immediately by disgust. The Jeremy Boon, the billionaire who buys companies like normal people buy coffee. "Unfortunately, yes." She laughed harshly. "Of course, I should have known. The universe has a cruel sense of humor." She started toward the exit, coat swirling around her. Jeremy followed, desperation clawing at his chest. "Wait, please. You didn't tell me your name." "Because I don't plan to," she called without slowing. "I know men like you. Your money can't buy what matters, and I'm not for sale." She disappeared into the crowd, leaving Jeremy standing alone like a man who'd just watched the sun set for the last time. Around him, other visitors continued viewing art, their conversations dull buzz that couldn't penetrate the sudden silence in his head. For the first time in his adult life, Jeremy Boon had met someone who didn't want anything from him. More than that, she actively despised what he represented, and for reasons he couldn't understand, that made him want to know her more than he'd ever wanted anything. That night, lying in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Jeremy stared at the ceiling and thought about honey-colored eyes and how someone could make love sound like both prayer and curse. The next morning, he canceled 3 meetings and returned to the museum. She wasn't there. He came back the next day and the next. By week's end, security guards knew him by name. The gift shop clerk asked if he needed help finding someone. Jeremy felt foolish but couldn't stop himself. Something about that encounter had awakened a part of him he'd thought permanently dead. On the 8th day, he found her again. She sat in the museum cafe, worn paperback of Pablo Neruda's poetry open before her, coffee growing cold at her elbow. She wore a simple blue dress that looked handmade and carefully mended flats. Her hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and Jeremy felt his heart do that strange, painful thing again. He bought coffee he didn't want and approached her table, hands shaking slightly. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up, recognized him, her eyes shifting from surprised to annoyed to something that might have been resigned amusement. "You're persistent." "May I?" He gestured to the empty chair. She sighed, closed her book, but nodded. Jeremy sat carefully, as if sudden movement might spook her. "What do you want, Jeremy Boon?" she asked, his name sounding like a diagnosis. "To understand," he said honestly. "To understand what you see that I don't. To understand why someone can look at art and feel something so deeply it brings them to tears. To understand why you think love like Monet's can't exist anymore." She studied him, fingers drumming against her cup. "You want to understand feelings. Most people in your tax bracket think emotions are for poor people." "Maybe that's why I feel so empty all the time," Jeremy said, words slipping out unbidden. Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the armor. "Empty?" Jeremy nodded, surprised by his honesty. I have everything anyone could want, and I feel nothing most days. But when I saw you crying in front of that painting, for a moment I remembered what it felt like to feel something real. She was quiet so long Jeremy wondered if he'd revealed too much. Then she opened her book and tore out a page, making Jeremy wince. "What are you doing?" Pablo Neruda wrote, "Love is so short, forgetting is so long," she said, writing on the torn page. "If you really want to understand, start there." She slid the paper across the table. Jeremy looked down at an address written in careful handwriting. "What is this?" "A place where love still exists," she said, standing and gathering her things. "If you can find it without using your money, your influence, or your name, maybe we can talk again." She walked away, leaving Jeremy holding poetry and an address that felt like both challenge and promise. He had no idea that in trying to win the heart of a woman whose name he didn't know, he was about to discover the most dangerous thing a billionaire could find, something money couldn't buy. Chapter 2. Learning to Trust. The address led Jeremy Boon to a place that didn't exist on any map his money had ever drawn. A children's hospital in Brooklyn where miracles were measured in smiles instead of stock prices. Jeremy stood outside the weathered brick building, watching through rain-streaked windows as volunteers read stories to children who should have been playing in parks, instead of fighting battles too big for their small bodies. The paper in his hand was damp from October drizzle, Pablo Neruda's words about love and forgetting smearing slightly, but the address remained clear. He almost turned around 3 times. This wasn't his world of glass towers and leather boardrooms, where suffering was discussed in quarterly reports as acceptable losses. But something about the way she'd looked at him in the cafe, like she was offering him a chance at redemption he didn't deserve, kept his feet moving toward the entrance. The lobby smelled like disinfectant and hope. Jeremy adjusted his tie, feeling ridiculously overdressed, when he heard laughter that made his heart skip. There, sitting cross-legged on the floor with children circled around her, was the woman from the museum. She wore scrubs covered in cartoon animals and had paint smudges on her cheek, and Jeremy had never seen anyone more beautiful. She was leading art therapy, her hands guiding small fingers as they created masterpieces that would never hang in galleries but held more joy than any art Jeremy had ever owned. One little girl, maybe 7, was struggling with her brush, tears of frustration forming. "It's okay, sweetheart," the woman said, voice gentle as spring rain. "Art isn't about making it perfect. It's about putting your heart on paper. Show me what happiness looks like to you." The little girl smiled and made a bright yellow sun with rays shooting everywhere. "That's my daddy coming home from work." "It's perfect," the woman said, and Jeremy could hear the emotion in her voice. "Absolutely perfect." Jeremy stood frozen, watching this woman who could have been bitter about whatever brought tears to her eyes in the museum, but instead was giving light to children who needed it most. Here was love in action, not theory. "Can I help you?" a nurse asked. "I'm looking for—" Jeremy realized he still didn't know her name. "The woman leading art therapy. I'm supposed to meet her here." The nurse's eyes widened, taking in Jeremy's expensive suit and watch. "You mean Shirley? Shirley Mcdaniel?" Shirley. Finally, a name for the woman who had turned his world upside down. "Yes, Shirley. She'll be done in 20 minutes. You can wait in the family lounge." Jeremy nodded, but didn't move toward the lounge. Instead, he found a chair near the art room where he could watch Shirley work. For 20 minutes, he observed her patient kindness, how she celebrated every child's creativity, how she made each kid feel like the most important person in the world. When the session ended and children were led back to their rooms, Shirley finally noticed Jeremy in the hallway. Surprise on her face quickly shifted to something that might have been disappointment. "You found it," she said, stripping off paint-covered gloves. "You didn't think I would." I thought you'd send someone else. Rich men don't usually like getting their hands dirty with actual human suffering. That edge again, the wall she built whenever she remembered who he was. Jeremy stood up, searching for right words. Why did you give me this address? Shirley gathered her things from a nearby locker, movements efficient and practiced. Because you said you wanted to understand what real love looks like. This is it. Love isn't a feeling you have while looking at expensive art in climate-controlled museums. Love is showing up every Tuesday and Thursday to paint with kids who might not see Christmas. How long have you been volunteering here? 3 years. She slung her bag over her shoulder and started toward the exit. Ever since my mother got sick and we spent 6 months in a place like this, I learned that healing happens in the smallest acts of kindness. Jeremy followed her outside into drizzle. Your mother, is she better now? Shirley stopped and turned to face him, expressions softening slightly. She has good days and bad days. Lupus doesn't really get better, Mr. Boon. It just teaches you to appreciate moments when pain isn't the loudest thing in your life. The way she said his name, formal, distant, made Jeremy's chest tighten. Jeremy, please, just Jeremy. Jeremy, she repeated, and somehow it sounded different this time. Less like an accusation, more like she was trying the word for size. They stood in the rain, neither quite sure what came next. Jeremy wanted to offer to drive her home, but suspected she'd refuse. He wanted to ask her to dinner, but something told him that would be entirely wrong. Can I ask you something? Shirley said finally. Anything? Why does a billionaire care what someone like me thinks about love? Jeremy was quiet, watching raindrops roll down hospital windows behind her. Because I've been surrounded by people who love my money my entire life, and I'm starting to think I don't know what actual love looks like. Because when I saw you crying in that museum, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Because you're the first person in years who's looked at me and seen something worth challenging instead of something worth using. Shirley stared at him, searching his face for deception. That's either the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me, or you're a better actor than I thought. I'm a terrible actor, Jeremy said, and for the first time since he'd met her, Shirley smiled. It was small, barely there, but it transformed her entire face. I have to catch the bus, she said after a moment. Let me drive you home. No. Let me call you a cab. No. Let me... Jeremy stopped, realizing what he was doing. I'm sorry. I'm trying to solve your problems with money again, aren't I? You're learning, Shirley said, and there was something almost approving in her tone. Jeremy watched her walk toward the bus stop, feeling helpless and frustrated, and more alive than he'd felt in years. As her bus pulled away, he made a decision his board would have called insane. He was going to figure out how to exist in Shirley Mcdaniel's world without using any of the tools that had defined his life. 3 days later, Jeremy was back at the hospital, not wearing a suit. He'd traded designer clothes for jeans and a sweater, his expensive watch for a simple one that had belonged to his father. He looked like any other volunteer. You came back, Shirley said when she saw him in the art room. You said love was showing up. I'm trying to learn how to show up. She studied him, taking in his different appearance, the paint supplies he'd brought. Why? Because I think you might be the first real thing that's happened to me in my entire life, Jeremy said quietly. And I don't want to miss the chance to understand what that means. Shirley was quiet for a long time, honey-colored eyes searching his face. Then she handed him a smock covered in cartoon dinosaurs. Rule number 1. The kids come first, always. Your feelings, my feelings, whatever this is between us. None of it matters as much as making sure these children feel loved and valued. Understood. Rule number 2. No money. You don't pay for supplies. You don't make donations in my name. You don't try to solve problems with your credit card. If you want to help here, you help with your hands and your heart. Understood? Rule number 3. Shirley's voice softened slightly. If you're doing this to impress me, don't. If you're doing this because you actually want to understand what love looks like when it's not transactional, then welcome to the team. Jeremy tied the smock around his waist, feeling ridiculous and nervous and more hopeful than he'd felt in years. I want to understand. That afternoon, Jeremy Boon, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and commanded rooms full of powerful men, sat on the floor with a 6-year-old named Marcus, who was teaching him how to paint dinosaurs. Marcus was missing most of his hair from chemotherapy, but his smile was brighter than any LED display on Jeremy's office walls. The trick, Marcus explained very seriously, is to make them look happy. Sad dinosaurs don't help anybody feel better. Jeremy looked over at Shirley, who was helping a little girl named Emma create a garden scene full of flowers that defied all laws of botany and physics. Shirley caught his eye and smiled. A real smile this time, one that reached her eyes and made Jeremy's chest feel too small for his heart. Happy dinosaurs, Jeremy repeated, carefully adding a smile to his T-Rex. I think I'm starting to understand. As the afternoon wore on, Jeremy found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. The children didn't care about his net worth or his business empire. They cared that he listened when they told stories about their paintings, that he celebrated when they mixed colors successfully, that he was present with them in the moment. When the session ended and they were cleaning up supplies, Shirley approached him. You did well today. I felt like I was learning a new language. You were, the language of being human. She paused, seeming to make a decision. There's a small cafe near here that makes decent coffee. If you want to continue this conversation, Jeremy's heart jumped. I'd like that very much. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a tiny cafe that definitely didn't cater to billionaires. The coffee came in mismatched mugs, and the tables were scarred with years of use, but Jeremy felt more comfortable than he had in any 5-star restaurant. Tell me about your mother, Jeremy said gently. Shirley's fingers wrapped around her coffee mug like she was drawing warmth from it. Her name is Blythe. She was a teacher before she got sick, 2nd grade. She used to say that children were the closest thing to magic she'd ever seen. Shirley's voice grew soft with love and worry. The lupus makes her so tired now. Some days she can barely get out of bed, but she still asks me about my day, still wants to hear about the kids at the hospital, still believes the world is more good than bad. She sounds incredible. She is. She's also the reason I work 3 jobs and why I'm getting my degree part-time. Insurance doesn't cover everything, and medications are... Shirley trailed off, seeming to realize she was sharing financial details with someone who could buy and sell her problems without blinking. I'm sorry, Jeremy said quietly. I'm sorry she's sick, and I'm sorry you have to carry that burden alone. Shirley looked surprised. You didn't offer to help. Most people hear about medical bills and either offer money or run away. Would you accept help if I offered it? No. Then what would be the point of offering? They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Shirley spoke again. Why don't you have anyone? She asked. I mean, you're successful, you're... She gestured vaguely at his face. Not terrible to look at. Why are you alone? Jeremy laughed, but it was a hollow sound. Because everyone wants something from me. Even when they say they don't, they do. Even when they claim to love me, they love what I can give them. I stopped believing in anything else a long time ago. That sounds lonely. It is. But loneliness feels safer than being used. Shirley studied his face for a long moment. Maybe the problem isn't that people want something from you. Maybe the problem is that you've forgotten how to want something real for yourself. Her words hit Jeremy like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. When was the last time he'd wanted something that couldn't be bought? When was the last time he'd worked for something he might not get? "What do you want, Shirley?" he asked quietly. She was quiet for so long that Jeremy thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "I want my mother to have more good days than bad ones. I want to help children heal from things that shouldn't happen to anyone so young. I want to believe that somewhere in this world, there's still such a thing as love that doesn't come with conditions or price tags." She met his eyes. "I want to stop being so afraid of being hurt that I push away anything that might be real." "Are you pushing me away?" "I'm trying to," she admitted. "But you keep showing up in places money can't reach, and it's making it harder to remember why I should be scared of you." Jeremy felt something shift between them, some invisible barrier beginning to crack. "What if we just started over? What if we pretended that we met as two people who volunteer at a children's hospital, and we both happen to be trying to figure out what love actually looks like?" Shirley smiled, and this time it was the kind of smile that could have powered the entire city. "Hi," she said, extending her hand across the scarred table. "I'm Shirley Mcdaniel. I paint with kids and believe in the healing power of art and terrible coffee." Jeremy took her hand, feeling warmth spread through his entire body at the simple contact. "Hi, Shirley. I'm Jeremy, and I'm learning that the best things in life can't be bought." "Nice to meet you, Jeremy," she said, and for the first time since they'd met, her voice held no trace of suspicion or walls or fear, just possibility. And for Jeremy Boon, that was worth more than all the money in the world. Chapter 3. Two Hearts Becoming One. Love, Jeremy discovered, was nothing like the business deals he'd mastered. It couldn't be negotiated, acquired, or scheduled in conference rooms, and it had the audacity to bloom in a cramped Brooklyn apartment while he learned to make biscuits at 5 in the morning. 3 weeks had passed since their fresh start in the cafe, and Jeremy found himself living a double life. By day, he ran a billion-dollar empire from his glass tower. By evening, he took the subway to Brooklyn, where he was learning what it meant to exist as just Jeremy, not the heir to generations of wealth, just a man trying to prove himself worthy of a woman who saw through every facade he'd ever constructed. The alarm on his phone buzzed at 4:30 a.m., and Jeremy was already dressed and out the door by 4:45. He discovered that Shirley worked the opening shift at Luna's Cafe on Tuesdays and Thursdays, starting at 6 a.m., which meant she left her apartment at 5:15 to catch the early bus. 3 days ago, she'd mentioned in passing that she barely had time to eat breakfast on those mornings. Jeremy had been thinking about that ever since. He stood outside her building at 5:10, holding a thermos of coffee and a brown paper bag containing his third attempt at making biscuits from scratch. The first batch had been inedible charcoal. The second had been better, but still not quite right. This morning's batch actually resembled food humans might consume. Shirley emerged from the building at exactly 5:13, bundled in a coat that had seen too many winters, but still carried herself with grace that made Jeremy's chest tight. She stopped short when she saw him. "Jeremy, what are you doing here?" "You said you don't have time for breakfast on early mornings," he said, suddenly feeling foolish. "I thought maybe I could change that." She stared at him, then at the thermos and bag in his hands. "Did you make coffee?" "And biscuits." "Well, I attempted biscuits. They might not be edible, but they're made with good intentions." A slow smile spread across Shirley's face, the kind that made Jeremy feel like he'd just closed the most important deal of his life. "You made me breakfast." "I tried to make you breakfast. There's a significant difference." She laughed, a sound becoming Jeremy's favorite music. "Show me." Jeremy opened the thermos, and the smell of properly brewed coffee filled the morning air. Then he opened the bag, revealing biscuits that were golden brown and actually looked like food. "Jeremy," Shirley said softly, taking one of the biscuits and breaking it open. Steam rose from the fluffy interior, and she took a tentative bite. Her eyes widened. "These are incredible. Where did you learn to make biscuits?" "YouTube," Jeremy admitted, "and approximately 47 failed attempts over the past week. I may have gone through more flour than a commercial bakery." Shirley laughed again, but this time there were tears in her eyes. "No one has ever learned to make biscuits for me before." "Then they were missing out on something spectacular," Jeremy said quietly. They stood on the sidewalk as dawn painted the Brooklyn sky in shades of pink and gold, sharing coffee and biscuits and something that felt dangerously close to intimacy. Other early commuters hurried past them, but Jeremy felt like they existed in their own bubble of time. "I'm going to miss my bus," Shirley said eventually, but she made no move to leave. "I could drive you to work." Jeremy. "Or I could walk you to the bus stop and ride with you, as a friend who happens to be going in the same direction." Shirley studied his face, looking for ulterior motives and finding only sincerity. "You'd take the bus?" "I've become quite fond of the bus, actually. It's amazing what you notice about the world when you're not sealed inside a luxury car." On the bus, Jeremy watched Shirley's reflection in the window and realized with startling clarity that he was falling in love with her. Not the careful, calculated affection he'd felt for women in his social circle, but something wild and terrifying and completely outside his control. The revelation should have sent him running. Instead, it made him want to learn everything about her: what made her laugh, what she dreamed about, how she liked her eggs cooked, whether she was ticklish, what her voice sounded like first thing in the morning. "What are you thinking about?" Shirley asked, catching him staring at her reflection. "You," Jeremy said honestly. "I'm thinking about you." Something shifted in the air between them, recognition that they were moving into uncharted territory. Shirley turned away from the window to face him directly. "Jeremy, I need you to know something." "Okay. I don't date rich men. I don't date men who could solve my problems with their credit cards. I don't date men who exist in a different universe than I do." Jeremy felt his heart sink. "Okay. But I also don't usually meet men who learn to make biscuits just because I mentioned being hungry. I don't meet men who volunteer at children's hospitals without trying to get their names on plaques. I don't meet men who take the bus just to spend 20 more minutes with me." Hope flickered back to life in Jeremy's chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know what this is, but I'm terrified of it, and that's probably a sign that it might be real." Jeremy reached across the small space between them and took her hand. Her fingers were cold from morning air, but they warmed under his touch. "I'm terrified, too. I've never felt anything like this before. What happens when you get bored? When the novelty of slumming it in Brooklyn wears off?" The question hit Jeremy like a slap. "Is that what you think this is? Some kind of social experiment?" "I don't know what to think. You're Jeremy Boon. I serve coffee for minimum wage and live in a studio apartment with my sick mother. This doesn't make sense." Jeremy was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "You're right. It doesn't make sense. But neither does the fact that I can't eat without thinking about sharing the meal with you. Neither does the fact that I've rearranged my entire schedule around your volunteer shifts at the hospital. Neither does the fact that I dream about your laugh and wake up disappointed that it was just a dream." Shirley's eyes widened. "Jeremy, I know it's crazy. I know we're from different worlds, but I also know that before I met you, I felt like I was sleepwalking through my life, and now I feel like I'm finally awake." The bus pulled up to Shirley's stop, but neither of them moved to get off. "I need time to think," Shirley said quietly. "How much time?" "I don't know. This is big, Jeremy. Bigger than anything I've ever felt before, and that scares me." Jeremy squeezed her hand gently, then released it. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. Shirley stood up to leave, then turned back to him. Jeremy? Yeah. Thank you for the biscuits. They were perfect. Jeremy watched her disappear into the crowd, feeling like his heart was walking away with her. He rode the bus to the end of the line and back, thinking about what she'd said, about the fear in her eyes and the longing that matched his own. That afternoon, instead of going to his office, Jeremy found himself at the children's hospital. He wasn't scheduled to volunteer, but he needed to be somewhere that reminded him of what was real and important. He found Marcus in the art room working on a painting by himself. Hey, buddy, Jeremy said, sitting beside him. What are you working on? A present for Miss Shirley, Marcus said seriously. She looked sad today, so I'm making her a happy painting. Jeremy looked at the canvas where Marcus had painted two figures holding hands under a rainbow. One figure had dark skin and curly hair, clearly meant to be Shirley. The other was lighter, wearing a suit that looked suspiciously like the one Jeremy had worn on his first day volunteering. That's a beautiful painting, Marcus. It's you and Miss Shirley, Marcus explained. She told me about you. She said you make her feel things she didn't think she could feel anymore. Jeremy's heart stopped. She said that? Uh-huh. But she also said she was scared because good things don't usually happen to people like her. What do you think about that? Marcus considered this with the seriousness that only children facing adult-sized problems could muster. I think good things happen when brave people let them happen. Miss Shirley is brave with everything else. Maybe she just needs to be brave with her heart, too. Out of the mouths of babes, Jeremy thought. You're pretty wise, Marcus. My mom says sick kids have to grow up fast, but I think maybe that means we see things other people miss. That evening, Jeremy went home to his penthouse and did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He wrote a letter by hand. Not an email, not a text, but an actual letter on paper with a pen. Dear Shirley, I know you need time to think, and I respect that, but I also need you to know some things while you're thinking. I don't want to solve your problems with money. I want to learn how to be the kind of person who could stand beside you as you solve them yourself. I don't want to change your life to fit mine. I want to build a life that fits both of us. I don't want to rescue you. I want to discover what we could become together. I've spent my entire life accumulating things, companies, properties, investments, but for the first time I've found something I want to earn. Your trust, your time, your heart. I won't pressure you for an answer. I won't show up at your work or your home. But I will be at the hospital on Thursday for art therapy because those kids need consistency and because showing up for them is showing up for you. Whatever you decide, thank you for teaching me what it feels like to be human. Love. Jeremy. He had the letter delivered by messenger the next morning, along with a single yellow sunflower and a note that read, From Marcus, who says good things happen when brave people let them happen. Thursday afternoon, Jeremy arrived at the hospital with nervous energy coursing through his veins. He didn't know if Shirley would be there, didn't know what her decision would be, but he knew he would respect whatever she chose. He was setting up paint supplies when he heard her voice behind him. You wrote me a letter. Jeremy turned around, his heart hammering against his ribs. Shirley stood in the doorway, wearing scrubs covered in cartoon stars and an expression he couldn't quite read. I did. No one writes letters anymore. Maybe they should. Some things are too important for text messages. Shirley moved closer, and Jeremy caught the faint scent of her perfume, mixed with paint and possibility. I've been thinking about what you said, about earning my trust. And I think maybe it's time I took some advice from a very wise 6-year-old about being brave with my heart. Jeremy felt like the sun had just risen inside his chest. What does that mean, exactly? Shirley reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It means I wrote you a letter, too. Jeremy took the paper with hands that trembled slightly. He unfolded it to find Shirley's careful handwriting. Jeremy. I've spent so long protecting my heart that I almost forgot it was supposed to be used for loving. I'm scared of what you make me feel. I'm scared of what we could become. I'm scared of getting hurt. But I'm more scared of spending my life wondering, what if? So here's what I propose. We take this one day at a time. No promises about forever, no grand gestures, no trying to solve each other's problems. Just two people learning what it means to love without conditions. And Jeremy? Next time you want to make me breakfast, I'd like to help. I make terrible coffee, but I know my grandmother's secret to perfect biscuits. Yours, if you want me. Shirley. Jeremy looked up from the letter to find Shirley watching him with eyes that held equal parts fear and hope. I want you, he said quietly, more than I've ever wanted anything, even if it's complicated, even if we have to figure it out as we go. Especially then, Jeremy said, closing the distance between them. The best things in life are worth working for. Shirley smiled, and Jeremy felt his entire world reorganize itself around the possibility of loving her. So, where do we start? We start with tomorrow morning, Jeremy said. 5 a.m., your kitchen, and you can teach me the secret to perfect biscuits. Deal, Shirley whispered, and when Jeremy leaned down to kiss her forehead, she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, and Jeremy discovered that love felt like coming home to a place he'd never been, but had been searching for his entire life. Outside, New York City hummed with its usual chaos, but inside the Children's Hospital art room, two hearts that had been guarding themselves against pain finally opened to the possibility of joy. And in that opening, something extraordinary began to bloom. Chapter 4. Life Grows Within. 6 months later, Jeremy Boon discovered that the most powerful merger of his life happened not in a boardroom, but in a tiny courthouse in Queens, where he promised forever to a woman who had taught him that some acquisitions were worth everything and cost nothing at all. The morning light streaming through their secret apartment windows painted everything in gold and possibility. Jeremy had bought the modest two-bedroom space in Brooklyn, not as an investment, but as a sanctuary, a place where he could be just a man in love, where wealth couldn't follow him, where he and Shirley could build something real away from prying eyes and his mother's poisonous influence. Jeremy woke every morning at 4:45 a.m. now, not because his alarm demanded it, but because he couldn't bear to miss a moment with the woman sleeping beside him. He turned carefully in bed, studying Shirley's face in the early light. After 6 months of morning biscuits, evening dinners cooked together, and nights spent talking until dawn, she still took his breath away. Her dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled silk, and her lips were slightly parted in sleep, making the soft sounds that had become Jeremy's favorite lullaby. But this morning was different. This morning, Shirley's hand rested protectively over her still flat belly, and hidden beneath her palm was the most precious secret they'd ever shared. 3 days ago, Shirley had taken a pregnancy test in their tiny bathroom. Jeremy had been in the kitchen making coffee when he heard her sharp intake of breath, followed by silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. When she emerged, she was holding the plastic test with shaking hands and tears streaming down her face. "Jeremy," she'd whispered, her voice filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. He'd taken one look at her face and known immediately what the test revealed. The coffee mug had slipped from his hand, shattering on the kitchen floor, but neither noticed. Jeremy crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled Shirley into his arms, both of them crying as they held the tiny piece of plastic that represented their future. "We're having a baby," Shirley had sobbed against his chest. "We're having a baby," Jeremy had repeated, the words feeling like a prayer and a promise and a miracle all at once. Now, 3 days later, Jeremy still felt like he was walking on air. Every time he looked at Shirley, he saw their child growing inside her, their love taking physical form, their future beginning to unfold in the most beautiful way imaginable. He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, and Shirley stirred, her honey-colored eyes fluttering open to meet his. "Good morning, beautiful," he whispered. "Good morning, Daddy," she whispered back, and Jeremy felt his heart explode with joy all over again. "How are you feeling? Nervous, excited, terrified, happy?" Shirley turned to face him fully, her hands still protecting their secret. "All at the same time." Jeremy placed his hand over hers, both of them cradling their baby together. "I love you, both of you." "We love you too," Shirley said, and Jeremy had never heard more beautiful words. They lay there in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint patterns on their bedroom wall and thinking about the future they were creating together. Finally, Shirley spoke. "Jeremy, we need to talk about what happens next." "What do you mean?" Shirley sat up, pulling the sheet around herself, her expression growing serious. "I mean, what happens when your mother finds out? What happens when the media finds out? What happens when your billion-dollar empire discovers that their golden boy has been living a double life in Brooklyn with a woman who serves coffee for a living?" Jeremy sat up too, reaching for her hands. "Hey, look at me." She met his eyes reluctantly. "Nothing changes," he said firmly. "Nothing about us changes because of what other people think or say or do. Everything changes, Jeremy. You know it does. Once this gets out, and it will get out, I become a target. My mother becomes a target. Our baby becomes a target." Shirley's voice cracked slightly. "Your mother will try to destroy me. You know she will." Jeremy's jaw tightened at the mention of Ione Boon. His mother had been growing increasingly suspicious about his recent absences, his refusal to attend social events, his general happiness. Just last week she'd cornered him in his office, demanding to know what had gotten into him lately. "My mother doesn't get a say in our lives," Jeremy said quietly. "Your mother controls half your company and most of your trust fund. She's been grooming you to marry someone from her approved list of society princesses since you could walk. She's not going to just accept that you've fallen in love with someone like me." "Someone like you?" Jeremy's voice sharpened. "What does that mean?" "You know what it means. I'm black, I'm poor. I don't come from the right family or go to the right schools or belong to the right clubs. To people like your mother, I'm everything that's wrong with your life choices." Jeremy felt anger surge through him, not at Shirley, but at a world that would make the woman he loved feel unworthy when the truth was exactly the opposite. "Shirley, listen to me," he said, taking her face in his hands. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. You are brilliant and kind and beautiful and strong. You volunteer with sick children and take care of your mother and work 3 jobs while getting a master's degree. You've made me a better person just by loving me. Any family would be lucky to have you, and if my mother can't see that, then that's her loss." Tears spilled down Shirley's cheeks. "But what if she makes it impossible for us to be together? What if she cuts you off, ruins your business, tries to take our baby away?" Jeremy was quiet for a moment, thinking about the trust funds and board positions and social expectations that had defined his life since birth. Then he thought about morning biscuits and children's laughter and the way Shirley looked when she was helping someone heal. "Then we'll figure it out," he said simply, "together, because you and this baby are worth more to me than anything she could take away." "Jeremy, marry me." The words came from his heart, bypassing his brain entirely. But he didn't want to take them back. He'd been thinking about it for weeks, dreaming about making Shirley his wife in every way that mattered. Shirley stared at him in shock. What? Marry me, Jeremy repeated, sliding off the bed to kneel beside it. I don't have a ring, and this isn't the romantic proposal you deserve, but I can't wait another second to ask you to be my wife. Jeremy, we've only been together 6 months. I knew I loved you after 6 days. I knew I wanted to spend my life with you after 6 weeks. The only thing that's changed is that now I get to love both you and our baby. Shirley was crying again, but Jeremy couldn't tell if they were happy tears or panicked tears. This is crazy. The best kind of crazy. The kind that changes everything for the better. What about your mother? What about the media? What about... Jeremy stood up and sat back on the bed, pulling Shirley into his arms. What about us? What about the fact that I can't imagine my life without you? What about the fact that you make me laugh every day and I've never been happier than I am in this tiny apartment with you? What about the fact that we're going to have a baby together and I want that baby to grow up, knowing that their parents were brave enough to choose love over fear? Shirley searched his face, looking for doubt and finding only determination. If we do this, if we get married, we do it our way. Small, private, just us and the people who matter. Whatever you want. And we don't tell anyone until after the baby is born. We keep it secret until we're strong enough to handle whatever storm comes. Jeremy nodded, though the thought of hiding their marriage made his chest ache. If that's what you need to feel safe. And Jeremy, Shirley's voice grew soft, we don't do it because I'm pregnant. We do it because we can't imagine not being married to each other. Jeremy cupped her face in his hands, looking directly into her eyes. Shirley Mcdaniel, I want to marry you because you are the love of my life. I want to marry you because you've made me believe in forever. I want to marry you because I can't bear the thought of not being your husband. The baby is a gift, but you are the miracle. Shirley kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, she was smiling through her tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Jeremy whooped with joy, spinning her around their small bedroom until they were both laughing and dizzy. When he finally set her down, they were both breathing hard and grinning like teenagers. When? Jeremy asked. Soon, before I start showing, before anyone gets suspicious. Today? Shirley laughed. Today? Jeremy, we need witnesses. We need Nolan and your mother. That's all we need. 2 hours later, they stood in a small courthouse in Queens. Jeremy in his best suit, and Shirley in a simple white dress she'd found at a vintage shop. Blythe McDaniel sat in the front row, tears of joy streaming down her face despite her obvious fatigue from her latest lupus flare. Nolan Hurst stood beside Jeremy as his best man, having cancelled 3 meetings and sworn himself to absolute secrecy. The ceremony was brief but perfect. When the judge asked if they had rings, Jeremy produced 2 simple gold bands he'd bought at a jewelry store on the way to the courthouse. They weren't diamonds or designer pieces, but they were real, and they were theirs. Do you, Jeremy, take Shirley to be your wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live? I do, Jeremy said, his voice strong and clear. Do you, Shirley, take Jeremy to be your husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live? I do, Shirley whispered, her voice thick with emotion. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Jeremy kissed his wife for the first time, pouring all his love and gratitude and promises into that single moment. When they broke apart, Shirley was Mrs. Shirley Boon, and Jeremy had never felt richer in his life. That evening, they celebrated with takeout Chinese food in their tiny apartment, sitting on the floor around their coffee table, eating lo mein with plastic forks and laughing about everything and nothing. "To the bride and groom," Nolan said, raising his glass of cheap champagne. "To new beginnings," Blythe added, her eyes bright with happiness despite her exhaustion. "To our family," Jeremy said, looking at Shirley with such love that it made everyone else tear up. "To miracles," Shirley finished, her hand resting on her still flat belly. Later that night, after Nolan had gone home and Blythe had fallen asleep on their couch, Jeremy and Shirley lay in bed as husband and wife for the first time. "Any regrets?" Jeremy asked softly. "Only that we waited so long," Shirley replied, curling into his side. Jeremy pressed a kiss to her hair, breathing in the scent that had become home to him. "I love you, Mrs. Boon." "I love you too, Mr. Boon." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, blissfully unaware that across town, Ione Boon was hiring a private investigator to find out what her son was hiding. They fell asleep believing that love was enough to conquer anything. They fell asleep not knowing that some storms are too powerful to weather, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones capable of destroying everything you hold dear. But for that one perfect night, they were just Jeremy and Shirley Boon, newlyweds expecting their first child, drunk on love and hope, and the beautiful naivete of thinking that happily ever after was guaranteed to people brave enough to choose each other. It would be the last night they would sleep peacefully for 6 years. Chapter 5. The Devil Wears Pearls. Evil, Shirley learned, didn't always announce itself with thunderclaps and dramatic music. Sometimes it wore Chanel suits and pearl necklaces and smiled while it destroyed everything you loved. 3 months had passed since their secret wedding, and Shirley was beginning to show. At 14 weeks pregnant, she couldn't hide the gentle curve of her belly anymore, so they'd started staying in their Brooklyn apartment more often. Jeremy had been working from home frequently, claiming he was exploring remote management strategies. But Shirley knew he simply couldn't bear to be away from her and their growing baby. This particular Tuesday morning found them in their kitchen, engaged in what had become their favorite ritual. Jeremy reading aloud to their unborn child while Shirley made breakfast. He sat behind her as she stood at the stove, his arms wrapped around her waist, his hands resting protectively over her bump, his voice a gentle rumble against her back. "Today we're reading about quarterly earnings projections," Jeremy said solemnly to her belly, holding up a business report. "Your daddy has to make very important decisions about investments and market positioning." "Jeremy," Shirley laughed, flipping pancakes with expert precision. "You are not reading business reports to our baby. Why not?" "Early education is crucial for development. Read them something beautiful." Jeremy set aside the report and reached for the book of poetry that had become their baby's bedtime story collection. "Okay, little one, today we're reading Pablo Neruda because your mommy believes in feeding souls with beautiful words." He cleared his throat dramatically and began, "I love you without knowing how or when or from where. I love you simply, without problems or pride." Shirley leaned back against Jeremy's chest, feeling their baby flutter in response to his voice. These moments, domestic and simple and perfect, were what she treasured most. Jeremy had transformed from a man who ate lonely meals in sterile penthouses to someone who couldn't start his day without talking to their child, who learned pregnancy nutrition facts with the same intensity he brought to corporate mergers, who cried every time they heard the baby's heartbeat at doctor's appointments. "I love you without knowing how or when or from where. I love you simply without problems or pride," Jeremy finished, pressing a kiss to Shirley's neck. "Beautiful choice," she murmured, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. Jeremy hummed against her lips. I think the baby liked it too. Did you feel that little kick? That wasn't a kick. That was a flutter. The baby is saying hello to Daddy. Jeremy dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to Shirley's belly, his face serious with concentration. Hello, baby Boon. This is your daddy. I love you so much already, and I can't wait to meet you. Shirley ran her fingers through Jeremy's hair, overwhelmed by love for this man who had gone from corporate shark to devoted husband and father-to-be in the span of months. What if we find out the gender today? Jeremy looked up at her, excitement dancing in his eyes. Do you want to know? I think I do. Do you? I want whatever you want. Boy, girl, as long as they're healthy and they're ours. I don't care. They were interrupted by the sharp ring of Jeremy's phone. He glanced at the screen and his expression immediately darkened. Ione, he said, showing Shirley the caller ID. Don't answer it, Shirley said quickly. You're not supposed to be working from home again today. But the phone kept ringing, insistent and demanding. Jeremy looked torn between his desire to ignore his mother and his awareness that avoiding her completely would only make her more suspicious. I have to take it, he said reluctantly. But I'll make it quick. He answered on the fifth ring. Hello, Mother. Even from across the kitchen, Shirley could hear Ione's sharp voice cutting through the phone speaker. Jeremy, darling, I've been trying to reach you for days. We need to discuss the Patterson merger, and Rochelle needs your signature on several documents. Where have you been? I've been working from home, as I mentioned last week. Working from home. Ione's voice carried that particular tone of disapproval that had shaped Jeremy's childhood. Since when do you work from home? You have a perfectly functional office. Since I decided that I could be more productive in a quieter environment. Well, productivity or not, you need to come in today. The Patterson family is hosting a dinner tonight, and their daughter Evangeline will be there. She's recently returned from her studies in Paris, and she's quite accomplished. Perfect wife material. Shirley felt her blood freeze. Even after all these months, hearing Ione casually discuss Jeremy's future with other women still made her stomach twist with anxiety. I'm not interested in meeting anyone, Mother. I've told you that repeatedly. Nonsense. You're 30 years old, Jeremy. It's time you settled down with someone appropriate, someone who understands our world, our responsibilities, someone who can give you the kind of marriage that benefits both families. Jeremy's jaw clenched, and Shirley could see him fighting to keep his voice level. I said I'm not interested. What has gotten into you lately? Ione's voice sharpened. You've been distant, secretive, refusing social invitations. Are you having some kind of crisis? Perhaps you should speak to Dr. Wellington about adjusting your medication. I'm not having a crisis, and I don't need medication. I'm happy, Mother. Genuinely happy for the first time in years. The silence that followed was so long and cold that Shirley could practically feel Ione's suspicion crystallizing through the phone. Happy, Ione repeated slowly. How interesting. And what, pray tell, has brought about this sudden happiness? Jeremy glanced at Shirley, panic flickering in his eyes. I've been exploring new interests. Volunteer work, actually. Volunteer work. The disdain in Ione's voice was palpable. Since when do you volunteer? Since I realize there's more to life than profit margins. Another long silence. Then, Jeremy, I think we need to have a face-to-face conversation. Today, I'm concerned about these sudden changes in your behavior. Mother, I'll expect you in my office at 2 o'clock. Don't be late. The line went dead. Jeremy stared at his phone for a moment, then looked at Shirley with an expression that mixed guilt and determination. I have to go see her. Jeremy, no. Something about this feels wrong. I can handle my mother, Shirley. I've been doing it my whole life. But she's suspicious now. Did you hear the way she was talking? She knows something is different. Jeremy pulled Shirley into his arms, holding her close. She doesn't know anything. She's just fishing, trying to figure out why I'm not the miserable, compliant son she's used to controlling. What if she's having you followed? What if she's hired someone to investigate? Hey, Jeremy interrupted gently, tilting Shirley's chin up to meet his eyes. Look at me. I won't let anyone hurt you or our baby. I promise you that. But, no buts, I love you, Shirley Boon. I love our child. Nothing my mother says or does will change that. He pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. I'll go see her, endure whatever lecture she has prepared, and be home in time for our doctor's appointment. We're going to find out if we're having a son or daughter today, remember. Shirley nodded reluctantly, but the knot of anxiety in her stomach continued to tighten. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't let her manipulate you into anything. I promise, this time tomorrow, this whole conversation will be forgotten. Jeremy left for Manhattan at noon, kissing Shirley goodbye with the passionate tenderness that still took her breath away. She spent the afternoon trying to distract herself with household tasks, but every few minutes she found herself checking her phone, waiting for a text from Jeremy to let her know he was okay. At 1:45 p.m., her phone finally buzzed. But the text wasn't from Jeremy. It was from an unknown number. Star Mrs. Boon. Your mother needs you immediately. She's had an episode. St. Mary's Hospital, room 314. Blythe had been having more bad days lately, her lupus flaring despite the medications, but she'd seemed fine when Shirley had called her that morning. She grabbed her coat and bag, texting Jeremy as she rushed toward the subway. Mom is in the hospital. Going to St. Mary's now. Call me as soon as you get this. The train ride to the hospital felt endless. Shirley pressed her hand to her belly, silently reassuring their baby that everything would be okay, even as her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Blythe was all the family she had left, the only parent who had ever truly loved and supported her. She couldn't lose her mother now, not when she was about to become a mother herself. St. Mary's Hospital was a maze of sterile corridors and fluorescent lighting. Shirley found room 314 after what felt like hours of searching, her heart pounding as she approached the door. The room was dark, too dark for someone who was supposed to be receiving medical treatment. Shirley felt a chill of wrongness as she pushed open the door. Mom, she called softly. The lights switched on and Shirley's world tilted on its axis. Her mother wasn't there. Instead, Ione Boon sat in a chair beside the empty hospital bed, perfectly coiffed and dressed as if she were attending a board meeting. Two large men in expensive suits flanked the doorway behind Shirley, effectively blocking her exit. Hello, Shirley, Ione said, her voice as cold and sharp as winter wind. Or should I say, Mrs. Boon, though I suppose that marriage license was just another one of your little schemes. Shirley's blood turned to ice. Where is my mother? Your mother is perfectly safe, Ione replied, examining her manicured nails with calculated indifference. For now. What do you want? Ione stood up slowly, her movement predatory and graceful. I want you to disappear from my son's life, permanently. No, I think you misunderstand, dear. This isn't a negotiation. Ione gestured to one of the men who handed her a manila folder. Your mother is currently being held at a secure location. Whether she remains safe depends entirely on your cooperation. Shirley felt the world spinning around her. You kidnapped my mother. I relocated her to ensure your full attention during our conversation. This is insane. Jeremy will never forgive you for this. Ione laughed, a sound like ice breaking. Jeremy will never know about this. As far as he's concerned, you've decided that marriage to a billionaire isn't the fairy tale you expected. You've realized that you don't belong in his world, that you never did. I'll tell him the truth. No, you won't. Ione opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. Because if you do, your mother will die slowly and painfully, and it will be entirely your fault. The photographs showed Blythe in what looked like a basement or warehouse, tied to a chair, unconscious but breathing. Shirley's knees buckled, and she had to grab the hospital bed rail to keep from falling. "You're a monster," she whispered. "I'm a mother protecting her son from a gold-digging whore who got pregnant to trap him. I love Jeremy. We love each other." "Love," Ione spat. "How quaint. Do you really think love is enough to bridge the gap between your worlds? Do you think a girl from the projects who serves coffee for a living can survive in high society? Do you think my son will still want you when the novelty wears off and he realizes what you've cost him? Jeremy chose me. He married me. Jeremy was temporarily insane. Men do stupid things when they think with their lower instincts, but sanity always returns." Ione pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. "You're going to write him a letter explaining that you never loved him, that the pregnancy was a lie to manipulate him into marriage, and that you're leaving him for someone with more money. You're going to make him believe that everything you shared was false." "I won't do it. Then your mother dies." Ione's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. "And after she dies, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of woman you really are. I'll destroy your reputation, your employment prospects, your future. I'll make sure you can never work with children again. I'll make sure no one in this city will have anything to do with you." Shirley pressed her hand to her belly, feeling their baby flutter as if sensing the danger. "What about your grandchild?" "What grandchild?" Ione smiled coldly. "Jeremy will know the truth, that you lied about being pregnant to trap him, that there never was a baby. But I am pregnant. That's not something you can fake, isn't it? Young women fake pregnancies all the time to secure wealthy husbands. And when the supposed pregnancy mysteriously ends after you've disappeared, Jeremy will understand exactly what kind of manipulative creature you really are." The cruelty of the plan took Shirley's breath away. Not only would Jeremy lose his wife and child, but he would spend the rest of his life believing that the greatest love of his life had been an elaborate con. "Please," Shirley whispered, tears streaming down her face, "please don't do this. We're happy. We're not hurting anyone." "You're hurting him by existing in his life. You're a distraction from his destiny, a mistake that will cost him everything if left uncorrected." Ione held out the pen. "Write the letter, Shirley. Save your mother's life and give my son a chance at the future he deserves. And if I do this, if I write this letter and disappear, you'll let my mother go? I'll let her live. But you'll sign a contract agreeing to never contact Jeremy again, never return to New York, never attempt to claim any connection to the Boon family. If you violate this agreement, your mother dies." Shirley looked at the photographs of her unconscious mother, thought about Jeremy waiting for her at their doctor's appointment, thought about their baby growing inside her, and realized that Ione had won before the game had even begun. With shaking hands, she took the pen and paper. "What do you want me to write?" Ione smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Shirley had ever seen. "Start with, 'Dear Jeremy, I never loved you.'" As Shirley began to write the letter that would destroy the only happiness she'd ever known, she felt their baby move again, and she silently promised her child that someday, somehow, she would find a way to tell them about the father who had loved them both more than life itself, even if it took forever, even if it killed her, even if Jeremy never forgave her for the lies she was about to tell. Chapter 6. When the World Stops Turning. Jeremy Boon learned that hearts don't actually break. They shatter into pieces so small that you spend years finding fragments in unexpected places, cutting yourself on memories that used to be beautiful. The meeting with his mother had been exactly what Jeremy expected. 2 hours of thinly veiled threats and manipulation. By the time he escaped, Jeremy was running late for the doctor's appointment where he and Shirley would learn their baby's gender. He tried calling Shirley repeatedly, but her phone went straight to voicemail. When he received her text about Blythe being in the hospital, panic hit him. At St. Mary's Hospital, room 314 was empty. No Blythe, no Shirley, no record of either being there. The nursing staff had never heard of Blythe Mcdaniel. By 7 p.m., Jeremy arrived at their Brooklyn apartment, hands shaking as he climbed the stairs 2 at a time. "Shirley, baby, are you here?" Silence. The apartment felt abandoned. Breakfast dishes sat exactly where they'd left them that morning. Shirley's coffee mug, half full and cold, sat forgotten on the counter. He searched frantically. Her overnight bag was missing. Her toothbrush was gone. Her favorite sweater, the one from their first meeting, no longer hung in the wardrobe. But it was what he found on the kitchen table that destroyed him. A single piece of paper, folded in half, with his name written in Shirley's careful handwriting. Jeremy's hands trembled as he unfolded it. "Jeremy, I can't do this anymore. I thought I could, but I was wrong. I never loved you. What we had wasn't love. It was me seeing an opportunity. A rich, lonely man so desperate for affection he'd believe anything. I'm not pregnant. I never was. The positive test was fake, bought online like hundreds of other women do to trap wealthy men. I thought if I convinced you I was carrying your child, you'd be so happy you wouldn't ask questions. The morning sickness, the doctor's appointments, all an act. I've been planning this since the day I met you. Did you think it was coincidence that I was crying in front of that painting? I researched you, Jeremy. I knew exactly how to make you fall for me. I've taken some money and jewelry. Payment for services rendered. Don't look for me. By the time you read this, I'll be gone with someone who has more money than you. You were always too easy, Jeremy. Too trusting, too desperate to believe in love. The woman you thought you loved never existed. Goodbye, Shirley." Jeremy read it 3 times before the words penetrated. The handwriting was definitely Shirley's. Her wedding ring sat on the dresser. Her grandmother's necklace was missing. He called her phone, number no longer in service. Called Blythe's apartment. Same automated response. Jeremy sank onto their bed, still holding the letter. This was the woman who had cried when she felt their baby kick. This was the woman who had made him promise to love their child no matter what. Hours passed. Cruel logic took hold. Shirley had never let him buy her expensive things, had insisted on a secret wedding with minimal witnesses. What if it hadn't been modesty but calculation? When Ione called that evening, Jeremy's voice was hollow. "I'm fine, Mother." "You sound strange." "I said I'm fine." Jeremy hung up, but something in his mother's carefully controlled satisfaction made his stomach turn. The timing was too perfect, but the letter was in Shirley's handwriting, and those cruel words could only come from someone who had never loved him. Jeremy spent the night staring at the letter, trying to understand how he'd gotten everything so wrong. As dawn broke, he finally accepted the devastating truth. Shirley Mcdaniel had never loved him. Their marriage had been fraud. Their baby had never existed. Jeremy packed his things that morning, leaving behind anything that reminded him of her. He stood in the doorway one last time, making himself a promise. He would never be that vulnerable again. But as he walked away from the apartment where he'd been happier than ever before, Jeremy didn't know that 2,000 miles away, Shirley was giving birth to his twin daughters, screaming his name through labor while believing he thought she'd never loved him. He didn't know that love, real love, was strong enough to survive even the cruelest lies. Someday he would learn the truth. Someday. Chapter 7. Hidden in Plain Sight. 6 years later, in a small town called Millbrook, where nobody knew her real name, Shirley Thompson watched her twin daughters paint pictures of fathers they'd never met, while she died a little more inside each day. The elementary school art room smelled like tempera paint and broken dreams. Shirley stood watching 6-year-old Sloane and Bryony work on their Father's Day projects with focused intensity that reminded her painfully of Jeremy. Sloane painted a businessman in front of a tall building. "This is my daddy," she explained to Mrs. Chen. "He works in a big office and he's very important, but he doesn't know about me yet." Bryony created swirls of blue and gold that captured emotion better than any realistic portrait. "My daddy has sad eyes," she said quietly. "But when he finds us, they'll be happy again." Shirley pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from sobbing. 6 years, and the girls still asked about their father daily. 6 years, and she still woke expecting Jeremy's arms around her. After Ione's thugs released Blythe, drugged but alive, Shirley had taken her mother and disappeared. They'd driven west until they found Millbrook, where Shirley gave birth to the twins in a clinic that smelled like antiseptic and desperation. She'd named them Sloane and Bryony, names she and Jeremy had discussed during those golden weeks when they'd believed in forever. Every night since, she whispered their father's name to them. "Your daddy loves you," she would tell them. "He doesn't know about you yet, but when he finds out, he's going to love you so much." The girls believed her because children believe their mothers about important things. But as years passed, their questions grew more complex. "Why doesn't Daddy call us?" Sloane had asked. "Sometimes grown-ups get separated by things bigger than love," Shirley explained, "but that doesn't make the love less real." Now she worked 3 jobs: teaching art at the elementary school, waitressing at the diner, cleaning offices weekends. They lived in a tiny apartment above the bakery. Blythe helped when lupus allowed, but her condition had worsened over the years. "Mommy, can we get ice cream?" Sloane asked as they walked to their old sedan. "Not today, sweetheart. Maybe this weekend if I get good tips." "I wish we had more money," Bryony said wistfully. Shirley's heart clenched. Her daughters had no idea their father could buy them entire art stores, that they were heirs to a fortune they'd never know existed. At Miller's Art Supply, Dr. Patricia Wells approached, Millbrook's only pediatrician and one of the few people who'd shown genuine interest in Shirley's background. "The girls are so talented," Dr. Wells said. "Bryony's painting at the library art show was extraordinary for a 6-year-old. Shirley felt recognition stab through her. Bryony had painted that from memory, based on Shirley's descriptions of New York, somehow capturing not just the physical reality, but the emotional essence. "She has her father's eye for detail," Shirley said before she could stop herself. Dr. Wells studied her carefully. "The girl's father, he's not in the picture. It's complicated. You clearly didn't grow up in a small town. You have the bearing of someone who's lived in cities. And the girls have a sophistication that suggests interesting genetics." Before Shirley could respond, Sloane ran over. "Mommy, look. This brush is exactly like the one in my dream where Daddy teaches me to paint." Dr. Wells raised an eyebrow. "Interesting dream." That evening, tucking the girls into their shared bed, Shirley studied their faces with new worry. The resemblance to Jeremy was becoming more obvious as they grew. "Mommy," Bryony said sleepily, "I had that dream again. The one where Daddy comes to find us." "What happens in the dream, baby?" "He's crying because he missed us so much. Then he hugs us and never lets go." After they slept, Shirley wrote her annual letter to Jeremy, one she'd never send but couldn't stop writing. "My dearest Jeremy. Today our daughters are 6. Sloane wants to be a businesswoman like her daddy. Bryony wants to paint pictures that make people less sad. They both have your intelligence, your kindness. I know you hate me. I know you think everything we shared was a lie. But every morning when I see your eyes in our daughters' faces, I remember what real love feels like. I'm sorry for the letter, for the way I left, For the 6 years you've spent thinking the worst of me. Someday, when it's safe, I'll tell you the truth. Forever yours, Shirley. She folded it with all the others. 6 years of love and longing and apologies that would never be read. Through thin walls, she heard Blythe coughing, the deep, rattling cough getting worse despite medications they couldn't afford. Her mother was dying slowly. Maybe when Blythe was gone, when there was no one left to protect, Shirley would finally find courage to tell Jeremy the truth. Maybe then she would discover whether love really was strong enough to survive lies told in desperation. Outside, New York was only hours away by car, but it might as well have been another planet. Inside, twin daughters who looked exactly like their father slept peacefully, dreaming of the day when love would finally conquer the lies that kept their family apart. Chapter 8. The Weight of Truth. Jeremy Boon had perfected the art of living without living, existing in a world where his heart beat but never truly felt, until the morning he woke up and realized he'd rather die with the truth than spend another day drowning in lies. 6 years of careful numbness came crashing down in his penthouse office on a Tuesday morning that started like every other day in Jeremy's carefully constructed emotional wasteland. He was reviewing quarterly reports when Nolan knocked on his door, carrying a manila folder that would change everything. "Sir," Nolan said carefully, "I have information you need to see." Jeremy didn't look up from his papers. In the 6 years since Shirley had disappeared, Jeremy had transformed into exactly the kind of man his mother had always wanted. Cold, calculating, focused solely on profit and power. He'd acquired 3 companies, doubled his wealth, and perfected the art of feeling nothing. What kind of information? It's about Shirley. Jeremy's pen stopped moving, but he didn't raise his head. "I've told you never to mention that name." "Sir, I think you need to know what I've discovered." For 6 years, Jeremy had forbidden any mention of the woman who had destroyed him. He'd removed every trace of her from his life, changed his phone number, avoided any place they'd been together. He'd even stopped volunteering at the children's hospital because the art room reminded him too much of her lies. But Nolan's voice carried something Jeremy hadn't heard in years, urgency mixed with what sounded like hope. Jeremy finally looked up. His assistant, the only person who'd witnessed his secret wedding and therefore knew the full extent of his humiliation, stood holding the folder like it contained explosives. "You have 30 seconds, Jeremy said coldly. Nolan opened the folder and placed a single photograph on Jeremy's desk. It was obviously taken from a distance, showing a woman and 2 small children standing outside what looked like a rural elementary school. Jeremy's world tilted. The woman was older, thinner, wearing clothes that had seen better days. Her hair was shorter and styled in a way that suggested economy rather than fashion. But the face was unmistakably Shirley's. And the children, Jeremy's breath caught. 2 little girls, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with coffee-colored skin and dark curls. One was holding a paintbrush, the other a picture she'd obviously drawn. Both were laughing at something their mother had said. Both looked exactly like Jeremy had looked as a child. "Where did you get this?" Jeremy's voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been having her monitored for 6 years, Nolan admitted. Against your specific instructions, I know, but I never believed her letter. I couldn't believe it. So I hired private investigators to track her down very discreetly." Jeremy stared at the photograph, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Those children are approximately 6 years old, born 7 months after she disappeared from New York. The math hit Jeremy like a physical blow. 7 months. If Shirley had been pregnant when she left, if the pregnancy hadn't been fake, then these children could be... "She lied," Jeremy breathed. "About leaving, yes. About not loving you, almost certainly. But about being pregnant." Nolan gestured to the photograph. "I don't think so, sir. Jeremy picked up the photo with shaking hands, studying every detail. The little girl with the paintbrush had his jawline and his tendency to furrow her brow in concentration. The other child had his eyes, not just the color but the shape, the way they seemed to take in everything with intense curiosity. "What else do you know?" Nolan consulted his notes. "She's been living in a small town called Millbrook under the name Shirley Thompson. She works as an art teacher at the local elementary school, waitresses at a diner, and cleans offices on weekends. Her mother lives with them but has been in declining health. They live modestly, very modestly. If she took any significant amount of money when she left, there's no evidence of it." Jeremy's carefully constructed worldview began crumbling. For 6 years, he'd believed that Shirley had been a master manipulator who'd played him for a fool. But women who con billionaires don't usually end up working 3 jobs in small towns. They don't usually live in tiny apartments and shop at thrift stores. "The children," Jeremy said hoarsely. "What are their names?" "Sloane and Bryony, the same names you and she discussed for your future children." Jeremy closed his eyes, remembering those golden mornings in their Brooklyn apartment when they'd made lists of potential baby names. Sloane had been Shirley's grandmother's name. Bryony had been Jeremy's choice, after the Shakespeare character who was brave enough to tell the truth, even when it cost everything. "Sir," Nolan said gently, "there's more." Jeremy opened his eyes, not sure he could handle anything else. "The timeline doesn't match the letter. According to my investigation, she disappeared from New York approximately 6 hours after your meeting with your mother, not after some elaborate planning session. It's as if something happened that day, something that forced her to leave immediately." Ice formed in Jeremy's veins as he remembered that day 6 years ago. Ioni's insistence that he come to her office. Shirley's mysterious text about her mother being in the hospital. The way his mother had seemed almost satisfied when he'd called her that night, devastated and broken. "My mother," Jeremy said quietly. "That's what I'm thinking, sir, but I have no proof. Mrs. Boon is very careful about covering her tracks." Jeremy stared at the photograph for a long time, his mind racing through possibilities he'd never allowed himself to consider. What if Shirley hadn't left voluntarily? What if someone had forced her to write that letter? What if his mother, who had spent his entire life manipulating him into the life she wanted for him, had finally found a way to eliminate the one thing that made him truly happy? "I need to see her," Jeremy said suddenly. "Sir?" "I need to see Shirley. I need to ask her what really happened." Nolan hesitated. "Sir, it's been 6 years. She might not want to see you. She might have moved on, built a new life." "Look at this picture, Nolan." Jeremy held up the photograph. "Does this look like a woman who's moved on? Does this look like someone who's living her best life after successfully conning a billionaire?" Nolan studied the image again. Even from a distance, even through a telephoto lens, Shirley's expression was unmistakably melancholy. She was smiling at her daughters, but there was something in her posture, something in the way she held herself, that suggested a woman carrying a heavy burden. "No, sir," Nolan admitted. "It doesn't." Jeremy stood abruptly, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. Somewhere out there, less than 3 hours away, were 2 little girls who might be his daughters. Somewhere out there was the woman who had either destroyed him or been destroyed for loving him. "Find out everything," Jeremy commanded. "I want to know what she does every day, where she shops, what her children are like. I want to know about her mother's health, her financial situation, whether she's dating anyone. And then I'm going to get the truth, even if it kills me." That evening, Jeremy did something he hadn't done in 6 years. He canceled all his appointments and went home early. In his penthouse, surrounded by the expensive artifacts of his successful but hollow life, he pulled out a box he'd hidden in his bedroom closet and hadn't opened since the day Shirley left. Inside was everything he'd kept from their time together. The Pablo Neruda book she'd torn a page from that first day at the museum, the program from their tiny wedding, a few photographs Nolan had taken of them at the children's hospital, the positive pregnancy test she'd hidden in his sock drawer as a surprise. The pregnancy test. Jeremy held the plastic stick up to the light, studying it as if it might reveal its secrets. For 6 years he'd believed this was fake, bought online to deceive him. But looking at it now, knowing what he knew about Shirley's character, it seemed impossible that she would have been capable of such elaborate deception. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed his mother's number. "Hello, Mother." "Jeremy, darling, I just wanted to confirm that you'll be attending the Morrison Charity Gala next week. It's going to be quite the event, and Evangeline Patterson will be there. She's recently divorced, you know, and I think—" "Mother," Jeremy interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. "I have a question for you." "Of course, dear." "6 years ago, when I was upset about a personal matter, did you do anything to help resolve the situation?" The silence that followed was a beat too long, a fraction too calculated. "I'm not sure what you mean, Jeremy. You were going through a difficult phase, certainly, but did you interfere in my personal life in any way?" "Jeremy, I think you're being paranoid. Perhaps you should speak to Dr. Wellington about adjusting your medication." Jeremy hung up without saying goodbye. His mother's deflection told him everything he needed to know. Ione Boon had been involved in Shirley's disappearance, had probably orchestrated the entire thing. The question was, how much had she known about the pregnancy? Jeremy spent the next 3 days in controlled frenzy, reading every report Nolan's investigators had compiled about Shirley's life in Millbrook. He learned that she volunteered at the local library, reading stories to children. He learned that she'd never missed a parent-teacher conference, despite working 3 jobs. He learned that she'd been saving money for art supplies for her daughters, putting aside $5 here and $10 there from her meager tips. He learned that Sloane wanted to be a business lady when she grew up, and that Bryony painted pictures of the New York skyline despite never having been there. He learned that Shirley had never dated anyone in 6 years, had never been seen with any man other than the elderly doctor who treated her mother's lupus. He learned that she was raising 2 brilliant, beautiful, talented little girls on almost nothing, and doing it with the same grace and strength that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. By Friday afternoon, Jeremy had made his decision. "Cancel all my appointments for next week," he told Nolan, "and prepare the helicopter." "Where are we going, sir?" "To get my family back." For the first time in 6 years, Jeremy Boon felt like he was truly alive. The numbness that had protected him was gone, replaced by a burning need to understand what had really happened and to find out if the love he'd lost was still waiting for him in a small town where nobody knew his name. He had no idea how Shirley would react to seeing him again. He had no idea whether she'd forgive him for believing the lies about her. He had no idea whether his daughters would accept a father who had missed the first 6 years of their lives. But he knew he couldn't spend another day living without the truth. And deep in his heart, in the place that had never stopped loving her despite everything, Jeremy knew that some loves were strong enough to survive any lie, any separation, any amount of time. Now he just had to prove it. Chapter 9. The Night Truth Walks In. Love has perfect timing even when that timing feels 6 years too late. Arriving in ballrooms filled with lies, announced by heartbreak so pure it stops the world from spinning. Jeremy stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, looking out at 500 of New York's most influential people, and felt more alone than he had ever felt in his life. The annual Boon Foundation Charity Gala was in full swing, Manhattan's elite dressed in their finest, champagne flowing like water, the kind of event that would grace tomorrow's society pages and be forgotten by everyone except the photographers. But tonight was different. Tonight, Jeremy had decided to tell the truth. For 6 years, he had attended this gala on the same date, October 15th, Shirley's birthday, and delivered carefully scripted speeches about philanthropy and community service. Tonight, as he stood before the microphone with his prepared remarks abandoned on the podium, Jeremy knew he was about to destroy his carefully constructed reputation, and he no longer cared. Across the ballroom, Ione Boon sat at the head table, resplendent in diamonds and disapproval, her eyes warning Jeremy to stick to the script. Beside her, Evangeline Patterson smiled expectantly, probably anticipating another boring charity speech before Jeremy would inevitably be pushed in her direction for another round of maternal matchmaking. They had no idea what was coming. A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't the kind of speech Manhattan's elite expected from their most eligible bachelor. 6 years ago, I met a woman who changed my life. She taught me what it meant to feel something real, to want something that couldn't be bought or acquired or negotiated. She taught me that love wasn't a business transaction, but something that demanded everything and promised nothing except the chance to be truly alive. Jeremy's voice grew stronger as he spoke, the words he'd been holding inside for 6 years finally finding their way into the light. Her name was Shirley, and she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Not because of how she looked, though she was stunning, but because of how she made me see the world. She volunteered with sick children, not for tax deductions or social credit, but because she genuinely cared about healing. She worked 3 jobs to take care of her sick mother. She could look at a painting and see the artist's soul. The murmur in the crowd grew louder. Several people at the head table looked concerned. Ione's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. I fell in love with her, Jeremy continued, his voice breaking slightly. Completely, desperately, irrevocably in love. And miracle of miracles, she fell in love with me too. Not with my money or my name or my connections, but with me. Just me. Jeremy paused, looking out at the sea of faces staring back at him with expressions ranging from fascination to horror. He found Edgar Mills in the crowd, his business rival who had spent years trying to find Jeremy's weaknesses. Tonight, Jeremy was handing him the biggest weakness of all. "We got married," Jeremy said quietly, and the ballroom erupted in shocked whispers. "In a tiny courthouse in Queens, with only our closest friends as witnesses. She was pregnant with our child, children, as it turned out. Twins." Ione half rose from her chair, her face a mask of fury and panic. Jeremy met her eyes across the ballroom and smiled, not with warmth, but with the cold satisfaction of someone who was finally about to tell the truth. And then one day she was gone. She left a letter saying she'd never loved me, that the pregnancy was fake, that she'd been conning me from the beginning. For 6 years I believed that letter. For 6 years I thought the greatest love of my life had been an elaborate deception. Jeremy's voice grew stronger, more confident. But this week, I discovered something that changed everything. I discovered that my wife didn't disappear voluntarily. I discovered that she was forced to leave by someone who couldn't bear to see me happy with a woman who didn't meet their standards of social acceptability. The ballroom had gone completely silent now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, frozen by the raw emotion in Jeremy's voice. I discovered that my wife has been living in poverty for 6 years, working 3 jobs to support the twin daughters I never knew existed. I discovered that she never stopped loving me, never moved on, never forgot what we had together. Jeremy's voice broke completely now, tears streaming down his face in front of 500 people who had never seen him show any emotion stronger than mild irritation. "I lost her," he sobbed into the microphone. "I lost the only woman who ever made me believe in love. And I lost 6 years with my daughters because someone in this room decided that their vision of my future was more important than my happiness." The ballroom was so quiet that Jeremy could hear his own heartbeat in the microphone. Several women in the audience were crying. Even some of the men looked visibly moved by his raw confession. So tonight, instead of asking you to donate money to charity, I'm asking you to help me find them. I'm asking you to help me get my family back, because all the money in the world doesn't mean anything if you don't have someone to share it with. All the success in the world is worthless if you're too proud or too scared or too stupid to fight for love when you find it. Jeremy stepped back from the microphone, his prepared conclusion forgotten. He had said everything he needed to say. The crowd could do with it what they wanted. The world stopped. Shirley stood in the doorway wearing a simple black dress that had clearly come from a thrift store, but looked elegant on her slender frame. Her hair was shorter than 6 years ago, and there were lines around her eyes that spoke of worry and sleepless nights. But she was still the most beautiful woman Jeremy had ever seen. She was staring at him with an expression of shock and something that might have been hope, her hand pressed to her mouth as if to hold back words that had been waiting 6 years to be spoken. The applause died away as people began to notice where Jeremy was looking. A ripple of awareness went through the crowd as they turned to see what had captured the attention of the man who had just bared his soul to them. Jeremy stepped away from the podium, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. Across 500 people and 6 years of pain, he walked toward the woman who had never stopped being his wife, his heart hammering so hard he was sure everyone in the ballroom could hear it. Shirley met him halfway. They stopped 3 feet apart, close enough to touch, but separated by an ocean of hurt and misunderstanding and time. Jeremy could see that she'd been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed and bright with unshed tears. "Shirley," he whispered, and her name felt like a prayer on his lips. "Jeremy," she whispered back, and hearing her say his name after 6 years of silence nearly brought him to his knees. The ballroom around them had gone completely silent again, 500 people holding their breath as they witnessed what felt like the most private moment in the world, being played out in the most public setting imaginable. "I know the truth," Jeremy said quietly, his voice carrying in the profound silence. "About my mother, about the letter, about everything." Shirley's composure cracked and she began to cry in earnest. "Jeremy, I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you. I tried to find a way, but she said—" "I know what she said. I know what she threatened. And I know about Sloane and Bryony." At the mention of their daughters' names, Shirley's hand flew to her chest as if she'd been shot. "You know about the girls. I know that I've missed 6 years of their lives because I was too stupid and too proud to question that letter. I know that you've been raising my daughters alone while I wallowed in self-pity and convinced myself I was the victim. They ask about you every day," Shirley sobbed. "Every single day for 6 years they've asked about their daddy. I tell them you love them, even though you don't know about them yet." Jeremy closed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulling Shirley into his arms for the first time in 6 years. She collapsed against him, her body shaking with 6 years' worth of tears, and Jeremy held her like he would never let her go again. "I love you," he whispered into her hair, loud enough for the microphone to pick up his words and broadcast them to every corner of the ballroom. "I never stopped loving you, not for 1 second." "I love you too," Shirley whispered back. "I've loved you every day for 6 years. I've loved you through 3 jobs and sleepless nights and explaining to our daughters why their daddy hasn't come to find them yet." Around them, the ballroom erupted in chaos. Some people were applauding again. Others were talking excitedly among themselves. Photographers were snapping pictures, and reporters were probably already writing headlines about the most dramatic charity gala in Manhattan history. But in the center of it all, Jeremy and Shirley held each other and felt like they were the only 2 people in the world. "Come home with me," Jeremy whispered urgently. "Come home and bring our daughters and let me spend the rest of my life making up for the time we lost." "Jeremy, it's complicated. There's so much you don't know, so much that's happened. I don't care how complicated it is. I don't care what we have to figure out. I care about you and Sloane and Bryony and the family we're supposed to be." Shirley pulled back to look at his face, searching for any trace of doubt or uncertainty. What she found instead was the same love that had made her believe in forever 6 years ago, only deeper now, strengthened by loss and refined by pain. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, yes. Let's go home." Jeremy kissed her then, in front of 500 people and a dozen cameras, kissed her like a man who had been dying of thirst and finally found water. When they broke apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. "Sir," Nolan appeared at Jeremy's elbow, having somehow materialized from the crowd. "The car is waiting whenever you're ready." Jeremy looked around the ballroom at the faces staring back at them, some shocked, some delighted, some calculating how this new development might affect their own interests. At the head table, Ione sat like a statue, her face a mask of cold fury. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jeremy called out, his arm still around Shirley's waist. "Thank you for an unforgettable evening. The Boon Foundation will continue its work, but from now on, it will be guided by different principles. Instead of charity that makes us feel better about our excess, we'll focus on justice that actually changes lives." He paused, looking directly at his mother. "And anyone who has a problem with my wife, my children, or my choices can take it up with our lawyers in the morning." Jeremy and Shirley walked out of the ballroom together, leaving behind a room full of people who would be talking about this night for years to come. As they reached the elevator, Shirley stopped and turned to Jeremy. "There's something I need to tell you before we see the girls." "Anything. They don't know your name. I've told them about their daddy, but I've never told them who you are. I was afraid. I was afraid that if they knew, somehow it would get back to your mother and she'd follow through on her threats." Jeremy cupped Shirley's face in his hands, looking into the honey-colored eyes that had haunted his dreams for 6 years. "What do they call me?" "Daddy. Just Daddy. They paint pictures of you. They dream about you. They ask me every night when you're coming to find them." "Tonight," Jeremy said firmly. "Tonight I'm coming to find them. Tonight we become a family." As the elevator doors closed behind them, Jeremy felt something he hadn't felt in 6 years. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of a man trying to recapture something lost, but the steady, certain hope of a man who finally understood that some loves are strong enough to survive any lie, any separation, any amount of time. In a small town called Millbrook, two little girls who looked exactly like their father were sleeping peacefully, unaware that their dreams were about to come true. And in Manhattan, the most powerful love story of the generation was finally getting its second chance. Chapter 10. When Hearts Come Home. Some endings are actually beginnings in disguise, arriving in the backseat of helicopters at midnight with two sleeping children who are about to meet the father they've painted in their dreams. The helicopter touched down in Millbrook at 11:47 p.m., its rotors cutting through the silence of the small town like thunder announcing the arrival of miracles. Jeremy helped Shirley out of the aircraft, his hand never leaving hers, as if he was afraid she might disappear again if he let go for even a second. "They're at Maxine's house," Shirley said, as they walked toward the waiting car Nolan had arranged. "I called her from the helicopter. She's been watching them tonight while I went to New York." Jeremy stopped walking. "You came to the gala on purpose?" Shirley turned to face him, her face illuminated by the helicopter's landing lights. "My mother died 3 days ago." Jeremy felt his heart break all over again. "Shirley, I'm so sorry." Her last words were about you, Shirley continued, tears streaming down her face. She said I had to tell you the truth, that I couldn't let your mother's evil win, that our daughters deserved to know their father. She made me promise to go to New York and tell you everything. She was a remarkable woman, Jeremy said quietly. I loved her like my own mother. She loved you too. Even after everything that happened, she never stopped believing that you would find us someday. They climbed into the car and Jeremy gave the driver Maxine's address. As they drove through the quiet streets of Millbrook, Shirley told Jeremy everything. How Ione had kidnapped Blythe, how she'd been forced to write the letter, how she'd given birth to their daughters in a clinic that smelled like desperation, how she'd worked 3 jobs for 6 years while never forgetting the man who thought she'd betrayed him. I wrote you letters, she whispered, every year on our anniversary. I wrote you letters telling you about the girls, about how much I still loved you. I never sent them, but I kept them all. I want to read them, Jeremy said. Every single one. And Jeremy? There's something else you need to know before you meet them. What? They're exactly like you. Sloane has your mind for business. She's 6 years old and she's already talking about running companies and making deals. Bryony has your artistic soul. She paints things she's never seen but somehow knows, like the New York skyline, like your office building that she drew from her imagination. Jeremy felt overwhelmed by love for children he'd never met but had been dreaming about since he saw their photograph. What have you told them about me? The truth, that their daddy loves them more than anything in the world, that he doesn't know about them yet because of something that happened before they were born, and that someday he'll come to find them. And they believed you. Children believe their mothers about important things, Shirley said softly, even when the mothers are starting to lose faith themselves. They pulled up outside a small house with a front porch that looked like it belonged in a Norman Rockwell painting. Maxine Durand appeared in the doorway before they'd even gotten out of the car, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the protective stance of someone prepared to defend her friend's children from any threat. Shirley, Maxine called softly. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, Shirley called back. Maxine, I'd like you to meet Jeremy, the girl's father. Maxine's eyes widened as she took in Jeremy's appearance, expensive suit, obvious wealth, the kind of presence that commanded attention even in small towns. But what she saw in his face was love and nervousness and hope so pure it was impossible to doubt. The daddy they've been painting pictures of for 6 years, Maxine asked. The very same, Jeremy said, his voice shaking slightly. Well then, Maxine smiled, you better come in and meet your daughters. They followed Maxine into the living room, where 2 small figures were curled up on the couch under a blanket, fast asleep. Jeremy's knees went weak as he saw them in person for the first time. They were even more beautiful than in the photographs, even more obviously his children than he'd imagined possible. Sloane was sleeping with a business magazine open on her chest. Apparently, she'd fallen asleep reading about quarterly earnings. Bryony was clutching a paintbrush like other children might hold stuffed animals, paint still under her fingernails from whatever masterpiece she'd been working on. Oh my God, Jeremy whispered, sinking into a chair across from them. They're perfect. They're yours, Shirley said softly, in every way that matters. Jeremy stared at his daughters, memorizing every detail of their faces, trying to absorb 6 years of love in a single moment. He wanted to wake them up immediately, wanted to hold them and tell them he was sorry for missing so much of their lives. But they looked so peaceful, so safe and content, that he couldn't bear to disturb them. What do I say to them? He asked Shirley. You say hello. You tell them you love them. You let them ask you a million questions, and you answer every single one. You let them show you their artwork and their favorite books, and the business plans Sloane has been making since she was 4 years old. Business plans? Maxine laughed softly. Last week, she presented me with a detailed proposal for improving the efficiency of my coffee shop. She's 6, and she was right about everything. Jeremy felt pride swell in his chest. And Bryony paints things that make grown adults cry, Shirley said. She has a picture she did last month of a man in a suit standing in front of tall buildings, and somehow she captured loneliness so perfectly that I had to leave the room when I saw it. She painted me. She paints you all the time. Both girls do in different ways. Sloane draws office buildings and business meetings, and what she imagines Daddy's work looks like. Bryony paints emotions, love and sadness and hope, and the way hearts feel when they're missing someone. As if sensing their parents' presence, Sloane stirred on the couch, her eyes fluttering open. She sat up slowly, looking around the room with the careful attention of a child who'd learned to assess situations quickly. Her gaze landed on Jeremy, and she went completely still. "Mommy," she said quietly, never taking her eyes off Jeremy. "Is that—" "Yes, sweetheart," Shirley said, moving to sit beside her daughter. "This is your daddy." Sloane stared at Jeremy for a long moment, her 6-year-old mind processing this moment she'd been waiting for her entire life. Then she climbed off the couch and walked over to him with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted she was loved. "You look exactly like I thought you would," she said seriously. "Except sadder." Jeremy's heart broke and healed at the same time. "I was sad because I didn't know about you and your sister, but I'm not sad anymore." "Good," Sloane said matter-of-factly. "Sad daddies can't make good business decisions." Jeremy laughed through his tears. "You're absolutely right. What kind of business decisions do you think I should make?" "Well," Sloane said, climbing onto his lap as if she'd been doing it her whole life. "First, you should move us all to New York so we can be a family. Then you should hire Mommy as an art teacher for your company, because she's the best art teacher in the world. Then you should let me help you run your business because I have very good ideas." "Those are excellent suggestions," Jeremy said, holding his daughter for the first time and feeling complete in a way he'd forgotten was possible. "I think we should implement all of them immediately." Their conversation woke Bryony, who sat up and looked around with the dreamy confusion of an artist coming back from whatever world she visited in her sleep. When she saw Jeremy holding Sloane, her eyes went wide. "Daddy," she whispered. "Hello, Bryony," Jeremy said softly. "I've been waiting my whole life to meet you." Bryony scrambled off the couch and ran to him, throwing herself into his arms with the complete trust that only children possess. Jeremy held both his daughters, breathing in their little girl scent and feeling like he'd finally found his way home after being lost for 6 years. "I painted you yesterday," Bryony said into his shoulder. "I painted you coming home to us, and you were crying happy tears." "I am crying happy tears," Jeremy said, and he was. Tears of joy and regret and overwhelming love streamed down his face as he held the children he'd never known existed. "Are you going to stay this time?" Sloane asked with the directness of a child who'd learned not to count on permanence. "Forever," Jeremy promised. "I'm never leaving you again." "What about the mean lady who made Mommy go away?" Bryony asked. Jeremy looked over his daughters' heads at Shirley, who nodded slightly. "The mean lady can't hurt us anymore," Jeremy said firmly. "And if she tries, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person she really is." For the next hour, Jeremy listened to his daughters tell him about their lives. Sloane showed him her business plans, written in careful 6-year-old handwriting with surprisingly sophisticated ideas about efficiency and customer service. Bryony showed him her paintings on Maxine's tablet, dozens of pictures she'd created over the years, all featuring a tall man with kind eyes who looked remarkably like Jeremy. "This one is my favorite," Bryony said, showing him a painting of a family holding hands under a rainbow. "It's us when we're all together." "It's perfect," Jeremy said, meaning it completely. As dawn began to break over Millbrook, Jeremy sat in Maxine's living room with his wife curled against one side and his daughters sleeping against the other, and felt peace settle into his bones for the first time in 6 years. "What happens now?" Shirley asked quietly. "Now we go home," Jeremy said, "all of us together. We find a house where the girls can have their own rooms and space to grow, where you can have an art studio, where we can build the life we should have had all along." "And your mother?" Jeremy's expression hardened. "My mother is about to learn that some mistakes have consequences. Tomorrow I'm calling a press conference to tell the world exactly what she did. Then I'm having her removed from every board position she holds in my companies. Then I'm making sure she never has the power to hurt anyone else the way she hurt us." "Jeremy, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. She stole 6 years from us, Shirley. 6 years of bedtime stories and first steps and birthday parties and Christmas mornings. She made our daughters grow up without their father and made me believe the woman I loved had betrayed me. There have to be consequences." Shirley nodded, understanding that some wounds needed justice as well as healing. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Jeremy whispered back. "Forever and always, and no matter what." 6 months later, Jeremy and Shirley renewed their vows in the same small courthouse in Queens, but this time with Sloane and Bryony as their flower girls. Blythe's photograph sat on the front row, surrounded by flowers. Ione Boon had been arrested for kidnapping and was awaiting trial. The media coverage of Jeremy's press conference had destroyed her social standing and resulted in criminal charges. The Boon Foundation had been restructured to focus on helping single mothers and supporting children's art programs. Shirley ran the foundation's educational initiatives while pursuing her PhD in art therapy. Sloane had been enrolled in advanced classes and spent afternoons at Jeremy's office with her own desk and business cards reading Future CEO. Bryony's paintings were displayed in galleries around the city, with proceeds going to children's hospitals. They lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn, not far from where they'd first fallen in love. Every morning, Jeremy woke at 4:45 a.m., not because he had to, but because he couldn't bear to miss a moment with his family. They made breakfast together, read to the girls together, took them to school together. Every evening, Jeremy helped with homework while Shirley cooked dinner, and they all ate together around the kitchen table where love was the most important ingredient in every meal. Every night, Jeremy and Shirley tucked their daughters into bed together, reading them stories about love that conquered all obstacles and families that were stronger than any force that tried to tear them apart. And every night after the girls were asleep, Jeremy and Shirley slow danced in their kitchen to music only they could hear, grateful for the second chance they'd almost missed and the love that had been strong enough to survive 6 years of separation. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone to the gala that night?" Shirley asked one evening as they swayed together in their pajamas. "I would have found you eventually," Jeremy said without hesitation. "Love like ours doesn't stay hidden forever. It finds a way." "You really believe that?" "I believe that some people are meant to be together, no matter what tries to keep them apart. I believe that some loves are strong enough to survive lies and separation, and even death. I believe that we were always meant to be here, in this kitchen, with our daughters sleeping upstairs and the rest of our lives stretching out ahead of us." Shirley smiled, the same smile that had stopped Jeremy's world in a museum 6 years ago. "I believe that too." And in their brownstone in Brooklyn, surrounded by finger paintings and business plans and the beautiful chaos of a family that had found its way back to each other, Jeremy and Shirley Boon danced slowly in the light of their love, knowing that some stories end exactly where they're supposed to begin. Forever. Always. Home. The end.